larger bones, they will take those bones, carry them up into the air and drop them so that they fall and smash onto the rocks into pieces small enough that they can then swallow.
Well, they do have a bad reputation for the things they hunt. They've been accused of taking livestock. I was reading up and they've been accused of pushing people off cliffs.
Yeah.
I'm laughing. There is no way this beautiful bird is responsible for pushing people off cliffs. It's got a bad reputation, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and like a lot of vultures and a lot of big birds of prey, you know, often they're seen on a big carcass, and particularly, you know, historically, they would have been thought to have killed that animal that they might be eating. And it has meant that they've been persecuted. You know, the last truly alpine bearded vulture was shot in 1913. There was a lot of persecution.
There's still not many of these birds, are there?
No, they've had a really intensive and very successful conservation program for bearded vultures for over 40 years now. But it takes a lot of management and it takes a long time.
I'm just looking at her now, and she's got these wonderful, I want to say whiskers, but this is part of the diagnostic features of her. So can we have a quick look in terms of her, just her head, it's so beautiful. When I think of vultures, what about you, Jess? I think of a bald head.
Yeah.
And they're sticking their heads into the remains of a buffalo or something, or a very unfortunate sheep, coming out all bloody and gory.
It's the first thing you think about, isn't it?
Yeah, whereas this head is absolutely beautifully feathered with these delicate markings of black and white with these beautiful tufts all along her beak here.
So one of the reasons the typical vultures that you picture when you think of a vulture have very short, very fine feathers and bald patches on their skin is to keep them clean. They're, as you said, diving their head into a carcass. The bearded vulture, because it's coming to the carcass when it is basically a skeleton, there's usually not a lot of meat left on the carcass when they prefer to eat from it. They don't need to have that mechanism for keeping themselves clean. So in many ways, they're much more eagle-like in the way that they look. As you said, they're almost sort of bristly whisker-type feathers to give them this beard, which is a very fine little sort of goatee-type beard. It's not a great big bushy beard.
It's quite hipster, isn't it?
Bit hipster, yeah.
So she's got these really charcoal slate grey feathers along the back side and down to her wings, but each one is almost offset with this beautiful white vein that you only really see when you really look. And they are gorgeous birds, aren't they?
They are, as you say, when you look at her up close, you appreciate just how stunning they are. And then, of course, the dye, the orange and pinks that come into their plumage as well.
Yeah, she's got this beautiful orangey pink all over her, really, on her neck, on her underside. But that's not actually the colour of the feathers themselves, is it?
No, what the bearded vulture does, which is pretty unique, is they bathe in mud to dye, to colour up their white feathers. So they go from white plumage to having these pinky orange colours that come from iron-rich soil, and they make themselves look beautiful, more attractive during courtship, during breeding season, by having these mud baths. And it stains the feathers permanently, so until they molt those feathers next time, they have this orangey pink hue to them. It's just beautiful.
Before we get inside, I saw you there, Jess, having a quick peek inside.
I couldn't resist,
I
sorry.
know, I know, you're getting impatient. Just inside the mouth, I mean, such a pretty, beautiful bird. You just opened up something that looks quite...
Yeah, so the beak looks sort of almost quite dainty and beautiful on the outside with this scythe-shaped point, but then you open it up and just the size of the inside of that mouth, that huge maw, is just...
It's as wide as the head, first of all. I mean, that extends well over 90 degrees, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's a really big mouth. Again, but I guess, Holly, as you mentioned, even if you're breaking up limb bones, there are still big chunks of bone going down there. You don't need a dainty little mouth. I'm quite surprised by that, Jess, but you've got the tongue there.
Oh gosh, that's strange. So it's got this relatively small, very narrow, quite strong and firm tongue, but it's got bristles at the end. What are they for?
So the bristles and the sort of point backwards towards the back of the mouth are to help them be able to swallow things. So they sort of assist in pushing the food down into the throat, and they're capable of eating some fairly hefty chunks of bone. So those bristles and those sort of forked point at the back of the tongue, pointing down the throat, help to manoeuvre the food as you go.
And the eyes.
Oh, they're stunning, aren't
They
they?
really are. Yeah, we've not mentioned them at all, but
Bright
they are.
orange.
They are. Is the colour of eye determined by when the bird is active? So we see things like owls with either very dark eyes, very pale eyes, orange eyes, yellow eyes. What does the eye colour, these beautiful orange eyes, tell us about this bird, if anything?
The bearded vultures have a really distinctive eye because the iris of the eye is quite different. And the bit that we're seeing here, which is orange, is actually what's called the scleral ring. It's a bony sort of iris, which most birds, you wouldn't see it, it wouldn't be obvious. With a bearded vulture, that scleral ring is visible inside the eyelids when the bird is looking at you, and they can actually flush more blood into that scleral ring to make it bright red. I think it's a sort of to make them, so as eyes in nature often are, to make themselves look more intimidating to someone else, to something else.
They're such striking birds.
Yeah, that's the word, striking. They are beautiful, striking animals.
I'd like to learn a little bit more about how these bones are getting down into the body. So
Exactly
we
the
can
same.
have a look
Yes.
inside the neck, inside the throat now.
Should we get the dive sound?
I think it's time. So I'm just going to pluck a few feathers so I can see where I'm making my first incision. Some of these feathers are quite downy.
They've got quite a lot of insulation. They come from a fairly cold environment in a lot of their range. They're up in mountainous areas, so there is a lot of down hidden underneath.
Yeah.
And this is so we can see just how she's able to get quite large chunks of bone down there, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm going to do an incision down the length of the neck and just see what the structures in there are like, because obviously if they're swallowing these huge bits of bone, we'd expect to have maybe quite a thickened esophagus or some kind of protection against these quite sharp objects that they're swallowing. The skin is so thin, it's just taking the lightest of feathery motions with the scalpel to go through it. And you can immediately see the rings of the trachea under there.
It's always so impressive just how, I want to say delicate, but they're not. They're so tough, but so delicately constructed, aren't they? They are just, in some ways, paper thin.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing how little separates those internal structures from the outside. Just this really thin layer of skin, not really anything else on top of that. So you can see we've gone right up the underside of the neck. So delicate. Could you hold that peak, please? Actually, it's not as thick as I expected. It's quite a thin-walled structure. Now, the esophagus in birds sometimes opens to sort of storage area called the crop, but vultures don't have those, do they?
Bearded vulture doesn't have a crop, but all of the other day-flying birds of prey do. So if you're one of the gyps vulture species and you're at a carcass guzzling as much meat as possible, the idea of the crop is that they can take advantage of that carcass and take as much food as possible and then slowly move it down the digestive tract and digest it over a matter of hours. But the bearded vulture doesn't have a crop, so the food goes straight down the throat, down the esophagus and into the proventriculus.
I guess you don't want to be storing sharp little shards of bone in the middle of your neck, do you?
No, you want to be able to get them straight down into the stomach where your stomach acid starts to do the hard work.
So I've exposed the two tubes inside the throat, the trachea and the esophagus. And the esophagus, I mean, it's really super stretchy. You can see that it can open really, really wide, but it's not as thick walled as I thought it might be. But just put your hand in and see how stretchy it is.
Oh, wow.
Get your whole hand in
You
there.
can. I'm actually really surprised.
Wow, look at that.
So it started off at the width of, I guess, a 50 pence
Yeah.
piece, and now you've managed to stretch it over.
So stretchy.
I wonder, Jess, if it's possible on the inside to see whether you can get a scalpel through easily. I mean,
Oh, that's a good idea.
worst case scenario, you've swallowed a very sharp piece of bone. It's fresh, it's shattered, you've dropped it from a height. How easy is it to puncture?
Okay, let's see if it pierces. Oh, it does actually take quite a lot.
You're having to really push there, aren't you? But that wasn't easy.
Pretty tough, considering how thin it was.
And considering that's a scalpel, trying to
Yeah,
go through
exactly, yeah.
that. That's interesting.
approaching the thoracic cavity, and I know that an air sac sits around here, doesn't it, Molly? So I'm just ever so delicately trying to go through without piercing them, but it's something that's very difficult to do, isn't it?
The air sacs are such delicate structures, they're very, very thin. They've got no musculature around them at all, so it's really hard to swallow.
And the air sacs are good.
Birds have the most efficient breathing system of any animal, partly because they have to be able to utilise that oxygen in order to fly. So their breathing is sort of a three-step breath rather than in and out. So on the first inhale, the air goes into the first set of air sacs, and then on the exhale, the air will then go further into the lung as other areas being exhaled from the second set of air sacs. It's sort of hard to explain like that, but there's a great diagram that shows the path that the air takes, and it doesn't go straight into the lungs. It starts in the air sacs, then round to the lungs, then into some more air sacs before being expelled.
It's more of a circular system, isn't it? Rather than coming in and out into the cul-de-sac across our lungs, then out again. It goes on this one. More of a journey around a circular system.
Yes, yeah, and some of the air sacs sort of stretch across the top of the body and actually out towards the wings, and then some of the air sacs are down in the abdomen, so lower down the body, sort of beyond the lungs. And it's really fascinating the way the air moves around and how much more efficient it is at taking oxygen from the air as a result.
Ollie, I can't believe it, but I'm certain that is an air sac there.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the intraclavicular air sac there. So these are the clavicle bones either side, aren't they?
Yeah, amazing. So there's just a really, really thin, transparent layer of tissue separating that air sac from us. I've never been able to dissect an air sac out before. That's amazing.
It's such a cool thing to see, isn't it? And actually, I've just noticed on the underside of the skin, you can see, well, now I'm looking at these are the feather follicles on the underside, so all these little bumps are where the feathers grow out from.
One of the really nice things about Lucas is we are learning things as we go along, so while we're trying to look for the esophagus, for example, we're already getting quite excited by this because this is the first time, Jess, you've seen an air sac like this, and Holly, you're equally excited by this. This is exploring internally to an animal that we're all trying to understand a bit better now.
It's something that, you learn something every time you do one of these post-mortems, don't you? Our collection, if anything, passes away. We want to do a post-mortem and try and understand more about why that might have happened. But you don't always get to see everything. You're busy looking for tissue samples of, checking for disease or whatever it might be. So this is really exciting, just to carefully and delicately.
Oh, look. Look at that. You can really see it between the skin there. I mean, that's amazing.
So this air sac that we've exposed is the one at the top of the system, if you like, up by the clavicle. And so what you're doing there, Jess, manipulating the intercostal muscles, the muscles down by the ribs and also moving the legs, that's causing air to flow in and out of that air sac.
Yeah.
It's more bellows, those things, so a bit of mechanical movement in parts of the body are aiding respiration.
Yes, yeah. So I think also when the bird beats its wings, that's another mechanical movement that adds to the area that you're looking.
Okay, should we move down to the abdominal cavity? So we've just exposed the abdominal cavity now, and the majority of it is taken up by air.
I would like to look at digestive.
Yes, yes, I'm going to cut through.
Because in many ways this is what this animal's responsible for. This ability to eat and digest both and to extract enough nutrients to become a very big bird is something that we have to look at, I guess.
It it's one of the things that really does set the bearded vulture apart from all the other vultures, but also birds, makes them unique.
Ben, have a look at this. So I've gone through those air sacs now. The abdominal cavity's quite big, sort of the size of 2 fists.
Yeah.
Most of that, more than a fist size, was taken up with these air sacs. You can see the digestive system sitting at the back of the bird now. It's tiny.
It does look as though you put the internal organs of a chicken into the cavity of a much, much larger bird right there, Jess.
It looks like everything's been scooped out. There's barely anything left.
And we typically see that abdominal cavity full, don't we? We see it as right to the edge, and if you cut me open right now, I happily know that my guts will be right at the edge there.
Certainly in mammals and in fish, they're very full, aren't they?
Yeah.
You open them and they're ready to come on.
But even many other birds, I mean, you and I both keep chickens, and I know that
Yes,
your
true.
postmortems, yours might definitely postmortems in mind, they're very often right at the edge of that abdominal cavity, whereas this really, it's hard to explain just how empty,
Yeah.
for want of a better word, that abdominal cavity looks. Although you say it's not clearly, it's being utilised and filled with these air sacs.
So we're trying to preserve the ribs and the rib cage, which means going from the bottom of the rib cage up into the thorax to try and remove the digestive tract. You can see the bottom of it here, but I'm just reaching up to see if I can extract it in its entirety. Can you see? Oh yeah, if I pull that tight, then you cut through all that. That's it, it's coming.
Jess, you really expertly and beautifully extracted the tract all the way from the tongue right down to the end of the digestive tract.
The thing that's most striking to me is in mammals we see a very defined esophagus and then a very obvious stomach. But here it kind of looks like that esophagus just widens a little bit, gets a bit chunkier and has sort of a blind end. But there's not a huge difference in structure or in form.
The bearded vulture, as we mentioned before, doesn't have a crop, and they're also capable in swallowing a bone, getting it all the way down that tract and into the stomach where the stomach acid can start digesting, but actually still have some of it poking out of the stomach and remaining up into the rest of the digestive tract. And as it starts to digest, the bone will drop down further. So it would make sense to me that this is just, as you say, a long, thin, sort of less defined until you get to the stomach that obviously has the closed end where digestion takes place.
It's like a big baggy fleshy sock, isn't it? Until you get to the stomach, and then after the stomach it's very narrow, very pencil width intestines. And I guess as Holly said there, if you've got a limb bone, a shin or a humerus or whatever it is sticking out from its mouth, you don't want twists and turns and convolutions in a separate compartment. You just want this big sack of digestive juices.
The one thing that is very different from sort of the top of the tube to the bottom is that the esophagus was quite thin-walled, whereas down here at the bottom is really thick-walled and strong.
This is the end where we've got this really concentrated stomach acid. I've been doing a little bit of work onto this, and I've got a little bit of a demonstration behind you, Jess. One of our lab technicians here, Joe, has been very kind in putting some stomach acid together for us.
Oh, I like
Just bring this across. We've got 3 jars here. 3 different concentrations. The water, which is pH neutral. We've got the one that says gastric juice, which is meant to represent our stomach acid strength. So pH 3.5, maybe pH 4, and then we've got something that should represent the stomach acid concentration of bearded vulture. So this one is 0.7. It's around about what? Really strong acid.
It's really strong, isn't it?
And several days ago, we put 3 uncooked chicken bones in each of these different solutions. And I just wanted to have a look at what happened in each of them nearly a week later.
In the water, it seems like nothing has happened. That looks like an entire, complete bone.
It's not really done very much, is it?
And in the gastric juice, which represents our gastric juice, doesn't look massively different from the water.
It doesn't really. You see something going on in the water itself. It's a little
Yeah, the
less
water's a bit
clear.
murkier, so maybe something's happened, but not a lot.
No, it's still there. You swallow an uncooked chicken bone today, it's still going to be there, sadly, next week. This one.
No. No. It's completely gone. There's nothing there.
Yep.
Wow.
I'm really surprised in the very concentrated, strong pH there, representative of this bird. And that's the first time I really understood just how they're doing this and just what's going on. These animals are digesting one of the hardest natural substances in biology. It's bone, teeth, that sort of thing. It's gone.
And how fast is that happening, Holly, after they swallow a bone?
I mean, the average bird would be digesting what it's eaten over a 24-hour period. And a lot of birds bring up a casting, a pellet of the feathers within 24 hours of eating that prey item. So with these guys, I would assume it's the same time frame, and that's why it has to be so acidic. Nothing gets stuck on the way through, it all gets dissolved.
And presumably that's why the second part of the digestive tract is so unremarkable, because by the time it gets to that point, the bone's gone.
Yeah, it's just liquid going through there that the small intestine, large intestine is pulling out the nutrients that it can from the liquid that the stomach acid has produced from that bone.
So what does their feces look like compared to other birds?
It's very, I mean, let's talk about poo, aren't we? It's a typical sort of human fascination. When you look at an average bird poo that you get on your car windscreen or you might walk past on the pavement, it has a white part and a brown part. In the case of the bearded vultures, the brown part of that poo is actually much paler, which makes perfect sense. The bones are pale, there's a lot of calcium, and the feces comes out very chalky.
I'm really glad we got to see that, because it just highlighted how they're able to survive on what appears to be a really poor diet. But I guess when you look at fresh bone with the marrow, as well as the inorganic stuff, the calcium on the outside, it is a nutritional meal that nothing else is going for. It's very clever again. What's been your favourite part of the post-mortem stages?
I mean, I feel so honoured to have had the opportunity to look inside such a rare animal. There are so few of them in the world. So first of all, just the fact that we've got to look inside her at all. And obviously it's got to be the air sacs. I've never managed to uncover a bird's air sacs like that before, and they were so beautiful. So yeah, that was my favourite.
Holly?
It's really fascinating for me to see that throat structure. I work with these guys on a regular basis, so I've seen just the top of the throat and how that all fits together, but to see how it then leads down into that stomach, and the demonstration with the jars of different pHs that you've done is just amazing to see that difference and how effective that stomach acid is.
What about you, Ben?
I thought it would be all the bone-based stuff, which is what I was most looking forward to. But actually, it's the little areas of pigment on the outside of the bird that she had adorned herself with. And it was completely unexpected, this behavioural thing where she'd been doing a bit of a glow-up to improve her chances on a date night. I mean, I love that. I mean, everything about her has been, as you say, really special. She's such a beautiful, majestic animal who survives on something that seems completely poor nutritional, and yet she's excelling. What an amazing, amazing experience. Hope you've enjoyed this edition of Wild Inside for the BBC World Service. For all episodes from this and other series, just search for Wild Inside on BBC Sounds. With special thanks to Joe Wright from the University of East Anglia. Thanks also to executive producer Adrian Washbourne. This series is produced by Ella Hubber.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
Helen Nebelong is one of the world's most celebrated natural playground designers. And in 2021, she was given her biggest challenge yet, to design one of America's largest natural playgrounds in a school in Illinois.
In the studio, Tuesday at 12:30 and 21:30 GMT. In 30 minutes, Crowd Science with Anand Jagatia.
How do our ears sense direction? I'll put my ability to localize sound to the test. Find out how barn owls can hunt in complete darkness and learn how to echolocate like a bat.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
It's 1 o'clock GMT. I'm Jackie Leonard and this is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. A call for calm from the UN Secretary-General after Iran's drone and missile attack on Israel.
The Middle East is on the brink of a devastating full-scale conflict. Now is the time for maximum restraint.
Israel's ambassador to the United Nations said Iran had crossed every red line and that Israel reserved the right to retaliate. In other news, Haiti's main political parties have urged a quicker transfer of power, accusing the outgoing Prime Minister Ariel Henry of changing the terms of an agreed deal. Also in the programme, the author Salman Rushdie on free speech, his new book, Violence, and surviving the attack that cost him the sight in one eye.
Language is a way of cutting things open and revealing the truth. Calling this book Knife is not just a description of the attack against me. The book is the knife.
All here on the newsroom from the BBC in London.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Opening an emergency session of the UN Security Council, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said it's time to step back from the brink after Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel late on Saturday. More details from David Willis.
We had this very stark warning from the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres that this could all lead to a massive escalation, potentially to all-out war. We heard allies of Israel weighing in to condemn Iran's attack. Equally, Iran's allies, Russia and China, also making the point that it was Israel's occupation of Gaza which was at the root of this and the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding there. So this was a fractious meeting of the Security Council.
Almost all the missiles Iran launched were shot down before they were able to reach their targets. Tehran said the action was in retaliation for Israel's strike on its embassy compound in Damascus earlier this month, killing 7 military advisors. At the Security Council meeting, Iran's permanent representative Saeed Iravani defended his country's actions.
Iran's operation was entirely in the exercise of Iran's inherent right to self-defense. This concluded action was necessary and proportionate. It was precise and only targeted military objectives and carried out carefully to minimize the potential for escalation and prevent civilian harm.
Haiti's main political parties have urged the outgoing Prime Minister Ariel Henry to speed up the installation of a new transitional council that's due to take over power and organize the next presidential elections. They have issued a statement criticizing Mr. Henry. The police chief of New South Wales in Australia, investigating the Sydney shopping centre attacker, has said that one line of inquiry is that he was targeting women. Joel Cauchi killed 5 women and 1 man, a security guard who tried to intervene before a police officer shot him dead. More now from Phil Massa, who is in Sydney.
The New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb said videos of the mass stabbings speak for themselves. She believes women were deliberately targeted and that the assailant avoided confronting men. Most of the victims and those recovering in hospital are women. A 9-month-old baby whose mother was murdered in the attack is in a stable condition following surgery. The 40-year-old attacker's mental health will be investigated by a coroner.
This is the latest world news from the BBC. Nigeria's anti-corruption agency says it's recovered a further $445,000 during its ongoing investigation into the Ministry of Poverty Alleviation. This is in addition to around $24 million that the agency announced last week that it had already recovered. It's been investigating the suspended Nigerian minister Betta Edu and her predecessors. The president of Kazakhstan has warned that a second wave of flooding could hit northern parts of the country, where overflowing rivers have already forced the evacuation of more than 100,000 people. The president said residents must be evacuated. The award-winning novelist Salman Rushdie, who was seriously injured in the stabbing attack 2 years ago, has warned that freedom of speech has become much more difficult in recent years. He's been speaking to the BBC ahead of the publication of his new memoir about the aftermath of the assault. Our culture reporter Noon Angie reports.
Salman Rushdie told the BBC he thought he was dying after he was stabbed 12 times as he prepared to give a lecture in August 2022. The author has received death threats since the publication in 1988 of his novel The Satanic Verses, and spent almost a decade in hiding. He said he was sorry to say that today a lot of people had formed the opinion that restrictions on freedom